All right. Well, good afternoon to some, good evening to others. I'm Dr. Jennifer, and I am here with Miss Shana Spence. She is not only a author, but she is a registered dietitian, nutritionist. I was introduced to her through her social media platform, the Nutrition Tea, and recently I've read her book, Live Nourished, Make Peace with Food, Banish uh, Body Shame, and Reclaim Joy. Um, I am I'm excited to have her with us this evening. So I just want to say welcome, Shauna. I enjoyed reading your book. And let's just go ahead and get started and jump in. And can you tell us a bit about what led you to write Live Nourished?
Sure. I don't want to say recent dietitian, but I'm a career changer, and I used to work in fashion, and I decided to become a dietitian mainly for public health. Just seeing a lot of the disparities between a lot of neighborhoods. I'm from and I live in New York, Brooklyn, New York, and there are huge disparities within neighborhoods when it comes to health. And I've noticed that always. And so I decided to switch careers, mainly to do that. And once I became a dietitian, then kind of learning all of these new things because, in school, we're taught one way for the medical field and sort of undoing a lot of biases and stereotypes. And so I realized that there really wasn't a book, especially by a Black dietitian.
Mhm.
There are only 3% of us. I actually, that's not even true. There's less than 3% of us out there as far as dietitians. Yeah, the numbers, I think it's like 2.8. So I definitely felt like we needed we needed representation.
Right.
And just really writing about nutrition in a neutral way. I felt like there are books about intuitive eating and not dieting, but they weren't including kind of checking in on biases and really just those stereotypes that we learned along the way. So I really wanted to write about that because I felt like that wasn't out there. Yeah.
Oh, awesome. I mean, you definitely are helping to fill a space, a gap there. A lot of time I run into women, especially women of color, who
Mm-hmm.
don't feel represented. They feel like, when I go to see someone to talk about, my nutrition, it's they're just gonna point their fingers at me and say, "Don't eat this, don't do that." You know?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And I know you
Yeah.
talk about that, some in your book as well, like, "Hey, I'm not gonna shame you," like,
Yeah. It's that
some
important. It's so important to, yeah. Sorry. Go ahead.
No, you're fine. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, like the people come in with the notion like, oh, this is gonna be bad. I know I need assistance with getting the right nutrients and things and nourishing my body. But I'm really scared of what they're gonna tell me. And they're gonna point that finger at me.
Mm-hmm.
But it's really good that, you have professionals like yourself that are filling the gap, not only in the work you do, but writing this book. So touching people locally where you are, and then abroad, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know. I think that it's so important because a lot of times our cultural foods are shamed. And no matter what culture, there's so many
Right.
across the board. And there's always something about every one of them, especially when we constantly hear about like the Mediterranean diet being the best diet out there. And so a lot of times people feel like, well, I don't eat that way, so I must be unhealthy. And so sometimes you do go into health professionals, doctor, dietitian if you're seeing one, and you feel a little bit of shame because you're not eating in a way that they expect, when overall that doesn't mean that you're unhealthy. And health looks like a lot of different things. So that was definitely another reason why I wanted to to write the book, for sure. you know so
Awesome.
yeah.
That is awesome.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, so I see a lot of people who a lot of women who are, I would say, very down on or ashamed of their body type, whether, they're young and they just don't like the body they have, or they're postpartum, or they're perimenopausal and having all the hormone changes,
Mhm.
and just looking at what's put out there, like on social media. Um, and you talked about that as well. Can you kind of tell us a bit more about how you view and how detrimental it can be for us looking at social media?
Times different I think there are many different variables, right? Like, for sure, we all know about the BMI, and I'm sure we've heard that term before, and now I think now it's becoming a little bit more known that it's not the best
Right,
indicator of things.
right,
And I in the book I write about kind of the history behind that and how that came to be the way it is right now. But I think also, for women of color, like Black women, I think that we are misrepresented, or not even underrepresented, I should say, when it comes to body image
right,
and even eating disorders. Because we think of, when I say we, society, we tend to think of very frail looking Caucasian women when it comes to body dysmorphia, or, dieting and things like that. And really, it affects everybody. But, especially us too, we, of course, have bodies. I say this in quotes for anyone who's just listening. I just want to make sure, body standards, quote unquote, that we, are told to aspire to look like. And that can affect us as well. So, I think there are a lot of different things, and that's why it's so important to talk about it, because I think that we are very much underrepresented when it comes to body image, when it comes to diets. You can ask anybody, and there are definitely diets in some way, or I should say, like, even disordered eating, talk about that as well. Yeah.
right. And you just mentioned disordered eating. A lot of times we hear,
Mhm.
eating disorders, something, like you said, we have a picture of what that looks like or what we think that looks like. But there's also disordered eating. Can you give us a couple of tidbits about disordered eating?
Can look like many things as a mental disorder or illness. And disordered eating can really affect many people. Like, honestly, if you go on social media, it's sometimes, being a professional now, I can look and say that's a bit disordered. Um, but it can look like counting calories obsessively. It can look like even being very obsessive about the ingredients in foods, or constantly tracking your foods to the point where you are not thriving mentally or physically. And what that means is, if you are in a social setting, you should not be preoccupied with the food that's being served or the food that other people are eating. Sometimes when you catch yourself constantly looking at what someone else is eating, I would check in, right? Because anyone who's really well nourished, I sometimes write about that as like a joke, but I'm very serious. Like, when we're constantly preoccupied with what other people are putting in their mouths or consuming, we might want to reflect on why that is. And it affects many people, especially, are also very underrepresented in that category, believe it or not. And so because we all have an idea of what we're supposed to look like, of what we're supposed to be consuming. And sometimes that really does affect our mental and physical health. Yeah.
Yes. Um,
Mhm.
and I kind of think, um, as I, think back a little bit further in seeing my classmates and things when we were in like middle school and high school, and I'm like, wow, they were, exhibiting some of these things that I can now say, okay, that might have been what was going on there, just kind of thinking back.
100%. Yeah.
But yes, I feel like we need to pay attention to that more. Um, and it just doesn't get the limelight, so to speak, because it's not sexy, so to speak.
Yeah, 100%. Yes. I know it's a very fine line because we do get often asked like what the difference is between disordered eating and eating disorder. And oftentimes it really is just getting or receiving a diagnosis. Because even disordered eating can become mentally and physically, exhaustive.
Right.
If you're not eating enough, your body is deteriorating, right? So you are being affected physically, mentally. I just talked about the preoccupation with food or the feeling the need to exercise excessively.
Mhm.
No one's saying not to exercise, but people who feel the need to go work out 3 times a day or more, you're not, an Olympic athlete here. You're just a normal person. There's no need for that. So, oftentimes it really is just a matter of receiving an actual diagnosis. Mhm.
Right, right. Um, that kind of makes me think about, um, we're bombarded with all kind of messaging about what we should eat, what we shouldn't eat. Some people, find themselves falling into those patterns of disordered eating and maybe even into eating disorders. But what are some things that we're seeing as being passed off as, oh, I'm striving to be healthy?
Mm. Oh goodness, yes. I think often I like definitely the reduction of calories where it's a little bit I'll just give you a baseline, right? So 1,200 calories is what we tell parents to give their toddlers. Okay. And toddlers are like 3 feet tall, like very small humans.
Right.
And so I still see that number being given for adults, right? And so if you think about it, okay, so here you have this little toddler, right? So if we just really, I tell people this all the time because they're like, well, it's not so much the calories, it's, the types of foods that you're consuming. But overall, 1,200 calories is not a lot of food for a human adult.
Right.
And so I tell people all the time, like, please. And I even tell them too, 1,300 calories. I kind of gave a breakdown in the book. And of course, I don't have these numbers memorized, but overall, about 1,300 calories is what our organs use every day just to function. Okay, just baseline to function. So we really need to be more mindful about just randomly throwing out a 1,500 calorie diet or like a 1,200 calorie diet. Really think about what your body is going to be going through here. Because if 1,200 calories is for a toddler, do we really think that that's sustainable, right? Because if we're talking about wanting to be healthy, we're trying to, I'm assuming you want something sustainable, right? Like eating habits that are sustainable, and that won't be sustainable, right? Your body is going to go into starvation mode. which is why we constantly are going through the diet cycle or the weight cycling. And the weight
Right.
cycling isn't great on the body either because of insulin resistance and all of these other things. So, you know, I really encourage people to think more about being sustainable rather than constantly taking things out of their day to day or like reducing things. It's so important to think about. Um, so just some food for thought, I say when we're talking about I want to be healthy, and there's nothing wrong with wanting to be healthy. I mean, we're both health professionals. We want people to be healthy, but we have to kind of think about what that means. Like, what does health really mean to you? Because oftentimes, I think when people say that, they're really saying, I just want to be thin. And, you know, bodies come in all shapes and sizes. So, not everyone is going to be super thin, super tiny. And if you want to be healthy, you're going to find a way that works for you individually. So, yeah, just some things to think about.
Right. I think you talked about like just reframing how we think about food and what does healthy look like, and how to find our
Mhm.
own paths to being in the optimal health as we can be.
Mhm.
Because um, whether you're in a city or you're in a more rural area with small towns, sometimes, there are food deserts, um,
Yes.
where, the best thing you can get is at the corner store or the local store that just has a few um, foods that you might can feel full off
Mhm.
of, like you've actually had a meal,
Yes.
and we don't think about those things all the time when we are talking about a patient's health and things like that. Those are things that need to be considered. How far is it to
Mhm.
the nearest place where they can get some great nutrition? Um, Not only that, but what can they do for their lifestyle? You know,
Yes.
do they
Mhm.
have something that's causing them not to be able to prepare food for themselves? Or life is just crazy busy, you know?
That too. That for sure.
Right,
Yes.
right, right, right. And trying to stick to some of the diets and fads and things,
Yeah.
um, it kind of, I want to say, put some people in a place where they're like, well, I'm hopeless. I can't get better, what they think is better and things like that. I can't follow what they say I should be doing. But yeah, I am I'll say obesity medicine, weight loss, doc, trained that way, after family medicine. But many of the patients are surprised that I don't start with their weight. Like, I know you're here to discuss your weight, but I'm going to investigate everything. And they're
Mhm.
surprised by that because they've seen so many professionals. There was like the primary thing is their weight. You know,
Yes.
we're
Mhm.
not talking about, like I said, how are they getting their nutrition, where they can get their foods from. Are they a person that has food insecurity? Um, it hurts to open jars,
Yes,
you know?
that's one. That's very
Yeah.
important.
I can't effectively use my stove. The best
Mm.
thing for me is my microwave. You know, so
Yes.
I see it as meeting people where they are,
Mhm.
um, and helping them to get to the optimal health that they can. But I think in the bombardment that we get from um, the world today and social media, it's just like, hey, if you can't do this like this, then something's wrong with you and not what's wrong with the system around you. And I think that you touched on that quite well
Mhm.
in your book. and in general
Yes.
each day.
Yes. Yes. I think it's so important because oftentimes we are told, um, or we're taught that people are in charge of their own health, or people, make choices that affect themselves. And that's true to like a small degree because, the social determinants of health in my mind are not talked about enough.
Right. Yeah.
And all the things that you just brought up are so incredibly important that people don't think about. If someone has issues like fine motor skill issues, chopping, dicing, using fresh ingredients, even if the grocery store is next door, actually cutting those foods and cooking them is going to be a problem for them. So it might be easier to buy pre-cut. I know a lot of times people think, why are people so lazy? They're like, they can just chop the onion themselves. Like maybe they can't,
Right.
or and even the microwave, people are ashamed. I forget who I was talking to the other day, but we were talking about like I was in my uh like exercise class, and the instructor was talking about she felt guilty because the week was busy and she was doing a lot of microwave like meals, like she was using her microwave more. And I told her, I said, well, it's a good thing you're even eating, like fat is best, because sometimes we forget that as well. And so as long as we're finding ways that work for us, because there is a much larger system at play, as I think we're realizing currently, with everything happening,
Yes.
that will affect our access to food, our access to, clean water, our access to environmental things, safe neighborhoods, safe housing, et cetera, et cetera. So it's so incredibly important to be able to work with what we have. We can always make recommendations as far as adding in, vegetables or nutrients, and, exercise how you can. But at the end of the day, it really is about, what you just said, like meeting someone where they're at, because there's a much larger system at play. And I think that hopefully more people are starting to realize that, unfortunately. But there's so many things to think about. I wish it was just, eat more vegetables, eat more fruit. That's easy, but you have to think, can someone eat more if if the grocery store is so many, miles and miles away, they don't have transportation,
Right.
things like that. So just really have to incorporate that in any type of nutrition counseling or health counseling. Yeah.
So as we think about moving forward about, we say, okay, yes, we need to think about how we look at our bodies differently, how we
Mhm.
nourish our bodies and take care of our bodies differently. Um, than the status quo that we've been given, so to speak. How do we move forward with the different tools to make sure we're taking care of ourselves?
Yes, I think that for one, just really recognizing that individuality is extremely important. And what I mean is that we often, sometimes not intentionally, we do compare ourselves and our lifestyle to what other people are doing, especially with social media. We have a little device at our fingertips, and it's very easy to scroll and to look at what everyone's doing. And, especially the younger generation, all of these different wellness trends sometimes are going back to disordered eating, and it's a little bit, makes me a little bit nervous. But we really have to recognize that what everyone else is doing might not work for us. And so it's really, if you have a schedule where, I remember when I was doing counseling, one of my clients was actually a news reporter, and she was in like the van, like just driving around, just looking for stories all day. So you can't really tell someone like that to sit down and enjoy a meal, like really be in tune with your body. And like you have to really recognize that her day might be better incorporating more snacks. And, you know, when I say the word snack, I know that a lot of people automatically think a bag of chips or something like that. Whereas I'm thinking it might look like a peanut butter and jelly sandwich because it will last longer, but
Right.
still be giving you nutrients. It might be looking like a package of like dried edamame, seeds or some, something like that, where she can grab and eat and still find nutrition, so her day is going to look different than someone who is, let's say, a stay-at-home mom. That's going to, so just really recognizing that different, not rules, but different ways will apply to different people. And so sometimes we get a little bit wrapped up in what everyone else is doing.
Right.
um, and so it's just important to remember individuality. I think that's number one. Yeah.
Yes,
Mhm.
definitely. Um, okay, your book is great. I like the way you placed it into a part one and a part two, kind of what we're facing, and then some tools like our I think one chapter you said find your own path, and we're talking about moving forward, your path forward. Um, I really want to make sure that our listeners and everyone that has joined us this evening, um, make sure that they get a copy of this book. Like I said, I've listened to the audiobook, but now it's like, okay, I need this paperback book in my hand so I can make notes, highlight things to remember, things to apply to myself, those around me, and to my
Oh,
patients.
thank you.
So where can we find your book?
Oh, thank you. Yes, it's really available wherever books are sold. I know it sounds so corny to say that, but Barnes and Noble, it's even if you go, so my publisher is Simon and Schuster, even if you go to Simon and Schuster and look up Live Nourished, they have links of where you can buy it as well. Amazon, of course, but even like many independent bookstores. So it really is available wherever books are sold. Yeah.
Well, yes, I definitely will keep it in my personal library and recommend it to others.
Oh, thank you.
Outside of your book, you do have a social media presence. Where can we find you?
Yes, so my handle is the nutrition tea for pretty much every platform. I like to keep things very simple. So it's the nutrition tea on Instagram. Where else? Facebook. There's a Facebook page. TikTok, all of that. It's the nutrition tea, and I also have a newsletter from Substack, also called the Nutrition Tea, and that's a weekly newsletter that goes out every Saturday. So yes, so those are the places that you can find me. Yeah.
Okay, awesome, awesome. We love the fact that you are putting very useful content out there.
Thank you. Thank you.
Um, so I hope that everyone will go and visit Shauna's social media platforms and Substack as well for her newsletter. I thank each and every one of you. I'm going to end the recording here just to see if there's anyone that has any questions before we wrap up this evening. So we're going to stop the
Okay.
recording.